Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be cracking open Mandate for Leadership, the conservative promise. It's like a playbook packed with advice for, a future conservative president, and it covers everything. Immigration, the Department of Energy, you name it.
It really gets into the nitty-gritty of conservative ideology, how to apply it, to actually running the government.
Okay, so this Mandate for Leadership, it's like a giant blueprint, right?
Yeah.
And one thing that really pops out is this focus on, strengthening the American family.
Yeah, they go beyond just like the typical talking points about tax breaks and stuff. They actually talk about using federal power to reverse what they call a family crisis.
Whoa. Okay, so using the government to, actually influence family structure.
That's a pretty bold idea.
Right. I mean, that's getting into some pretty personal territory.
It is, and it's interesting because the document also stresses individual responsibility and empowering families and communities to solve problems.
It's not just about the government, dictating things.
Right. It's more nuanced than that. There's this tension between advocating for a certain type of family structure and also pulling back on government involvement.
It's a tricky balance for sure. Now, another hot button issue that this document doesn't shy away from is immigration.
Oh, yeah. They go all in on that.
So what are they saying? What do they want to see happen?
They call for some pretty big changes to the Department of Homeland Security. Specifically, they want to shift USCIS, the agency that handles citizenship and immigration services.
Okay, yeah, I remember them. So what kind of shift are we talking about here?
They want to see USCIS move away from what they see as an open borders approach and shift back to a focus on, strict vetting, national security, that kind of thing.
That definitely sounds familiar. It's like an echo of Trump's tough on immigration stance.
Right. And they get even more specific. They advocate for mandatory detention for anyone caught crossing the border illegally, and they want to end catch and release policies.
Whoa, okay. So they're not messing around. And I mean, those were policies that Trump actually pushed for.
Exactly. It's like we're seeing pieces of this document reflected in his actions.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle, right? You see how these pieces fit together. So let's shift gears for a second, talk about the economy. Was Trump, on the same page as this document when it came to economic policy?
Well, the document really emphasizes restoring American manufacturing, which, aligns with Trump's America First agenda.
Right. Bringing back jobs, making America more self-sufficient.
Exactly. And it goes even further. They actually criticize the World Trade Organization and this thing called the most favored nation principle.
Okay, most favored nation. That sounds like a good thing, right?
You'd think so, but the document argues that it actually encourages other countries to keep high tariffs on American goods, which ends up hurting our economy.
Ah, I see. So it's kind of like a most favored in name only.
Yeah, pretty much. And that definitely lines up with Trump's skepticism of a lot of international trade agreements and, his willingness to impose tariffs.
Right, right. He wasn't afraid to shake things up a bit.
Yeah.
Now, this document also talks about dealing with China, which was a huge focus during the Trump years.
Oh, yeah, big time. They push for a multi-pronged approach to, countering China's growing influence, which is something we saw a lot of from Trump.
Right. The tariffs, the trade negotiations, even trying to limit Chinese investment in the U.S., it's all there.
It is, but there's this interesting wrinkle. The document also suggests that the U.S. should consider rejoining the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the trade agreement that Trump actually pulled us out of.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So even within this, conservative playbook, there's some disagreement on how to handle China.
Yeah, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Okay, last question before we move on. I know Trump was pretty vocal about his views on the Federal Reserve. Does this document have anything to say about the Fed?
It does. It advocates for policies that aim to rein in the Federal Reserve's power, and it even suggests considering alternatives like the K% rule or free banking.
Whoa, hold on. K% rule, free banking. Those sound pretty intense.
They are. I mean, the K% rule is basically a way to limit how much the money supply can grow each year. And free banking is, it's a system where private banks issue their own currency instead of having a central bank like the Fed control everything.
Wow. Okay. So pretty radical ideas. And Trump, he didn't really go that far, did he?
Not exactly. He was more focused on publicly pressuring the Fed to lower interest rates.
So he wanted to limit the Fed's power, but maybe not through these super drastic measures.
Right. He had his own way of doing things.
Okay, so we've seen some pretty strong alignment between this document and Trump's actions on things like immigration and trade. But there are also some areas where he diverged, like his approach to the Fed.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag.
It is, but it's given us a lot to think about. So stay tuned, folks. We're just getting started. So we've been talking about this mandate for leadership and how some of his ideas seem to have popped up in Trump's policies.
It's like a roadmap almost, but not just for Trump, it's for any conservative leader who wants to put these ideas into action.
Right, right. It's like a blueprint for a conservative America. And it gets pretty specific about how to actually run the government.
Oh yeah, it dives into the nitty-gritty of different government agencies and how they should be structured and what their priorities should be.
Okay, so which agencies are they zeroing in on, and what kind of changes are they proposing?
Well, they focus on agencies that they believe have become too big, too bureaucratic, or too intrusive in the lives of, ordinary citizens.
Okay, so we're talking about classic conservative targets like the EPA, the Department of Education, maybe even the IRS.
You got it. They argue that these agencies have kind of overstepped their bounds and that their power needs to be, curtailed.
Right, right. So what's their strategy for achieving that? Are they talking about completely abolishing these agencies, or are they proposing more incremental reforms?
It really depends on the agency, but they generally advocate for a combination of downsizing, deregulation, and refocusing their missions.
Okay, so less government intervention,
Yeah.
less regulation, more focus on core functions. Let's take a closer look at some specific examples. What do they have in store for the EPA, for instance?
Well, they call for a significant reduction in the EPA's regulatory authority. They argue that it's stifled economic growth and imposed, unnecessary burdens on businesses.
Right, right. Less red tape, more freedom for businesses to operate.
Exactly. And they also want to see a shift in focus away from climate change and towards, more traditional environmental concerns.
So less emphasis on global warming and more on things like clean air and water.
Right. They argue that the EPA has become too fixated on climate change at the expense of other important environmental issues.
Okay, that's their vision for the EPA.
Yeah.
What about the Department of Education? What kind of makeover do they have planned for that?
They advocate for a much smaller role for the federal government in education. They argue that it should primarily be a state and local responsibility.
So they're basically calling for a devolution of power back to the states.
Exactly. They believe that local communities are better equipped to make decisions about their own schools.
Interesting. It's like they're trying to strike a balance between national standards and local control.
They are. They argue that the current system is too top down and that it stifles innovation and choice in education.
Okay, so less federal involvement in education. What about the IRS? Do they have any plans for simplifying the tax code or reducing the burden on taxpayers?
They do. They advocate for a major overhaul of the tax code. They want to make it simpler, fairer, and more conducive to economic growth.
So lower taxes, fewer deductions, a more streamlined process.
Exactly. They argue that the current tax code is too complex, too burdensome, and that it discourages investment and entrepreneurship.
Right, right. Make it easier for businesses to thrive. Okay, so that's their vision for the IRS. It seems like their overall approach to reforming government agencies is to shrink their size, reduce their regulatory power, and refocus their missions on what they see as their core functions.
You got it. It's all about promoting limited government, individual liberty, and free markets.
Right, right. So basically creating a more business-friendly environment where individuals and businesses have more freedom to operate without excessive government interference.
Exactly. It's about empowering people, not controlling them.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, looking at the document's recommendations on everything from the budget to foreign policy to social issues to government agencies. It's clear that they have a very specific vision for how America should be governed.
They do, and it's a vision that has had a significant impact on conservative thinking and policymaking, even beyond this particular document.
Right, right. It's like a set of guiding principles that have shaped the conservative movement for decades.
Exactly, and it's important to understand these principles if you want to understand, where the conservative movement is coming from and where it might be going in the future.
Right, right. It's all about understanding the bigger picture. But the big question is, how much of this vision has actually been translated into reality? How closely has Trump followed this playbook?
That's a good question, and that's what we'll explore further as we continue our deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks. We're just getting started. So we've been going deep on this mandate for leadership thing, and it's clear that it paints a very specific vision of how these folks think America should be run, you know?
Yeah, it's like their ideal scenario for how the country should operate based on, conservative principles.
Right, right. And we've seen how some of those ideas seem to have made their way into Trump's policies, right?
Yeah, definitely. But now I'm kind of wondering, like, if we zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture, what are the potential long-term consequences of this kind of conservative agenda? Like, if these ideas were like fully implemented, what would America actually look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's like we're trying to predict the future, right?
Exactly. But, by looking at these ideas, we can at least get some sense of what the folks who wrote this document are hoping for.
Right, right. So where do you think we might see the most significant changes?
Well, one area that jumps out is the balance of power between the federal government and the states.
Right. They're big on devolution, right?
Yeah.
Giving more power back to the states.
Exactly, especially when it comes to things like education and environmental regulation. If those policies were actually put into practice, we could see a much more decentralized system, with states having way more freedom to set their own priorities.
And that could lead to a lot of variation across the country, right?
Yeah.
Like some states might go full-on conservative, while others might swing in a totally different direction.
Absolutely. You could end up with a patchwork of policies with different states taking wildly different approaches to, everything from education standards to environmental protection to social welfare programs.
Wow, that's kind of a mind-blowing thought, you know?
Yeah.
It'd be like a giant experiment in federalism, with each state being a laboratory for different ways of governing.
It's a fascinating possibility for sure. And it raises all these questions about, whether such a decentralized system would ultimately be a good thing or a bad thing for the country as a whole.
Yeah, a lot to think about there. What other potential long-term consequences do you see?
Well, another big one to consider is the impact on the economy.
Right. This document is all about promoting economic growth.
Yeah.
Deregulation, tax cuts, a more aggressive trade policy.
Exactly. And while those policies could, maybe lead to some short-term gains, there's also a risk of unintended consequences.
Like what?
Well, deregulation could lead to, environmental damage or consumer harm if businesses aren't subject to the same level of oversight.
Right, right. And tax cuts, while they might stimulate the economy at first, could also lead to bigger budget deficits and more inequality, especially if they mostly benefit the wealthy.
Exactly. And a more aggressive approach to trade could, spark trade wars or lead to retaliatory tariffs that end up hurting, American businesses and consumers.
So it's complicated, right? There's potential benefits and risks to consider, and it's tough to say for sure what the long-term outcome would be.
Yeah, totally. It's a delicate balance, and any policy decisions need to be made with a clear understanding of the potential trade-offs involved.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential impact on federalism and the economy. What about social issues? How might this agenda reshape the social fabric of America?
Well, the document's emphasis on traditional family values and its opposition to things like, abortion and same-sex marriage could definitely have a big impact on how those issues are, debated and addressed in the public sphere.
Right. It reflects a very specific set of social values that might not align with the views of a lot of Americans, especially younger generations.
Yeah, for sure. It could lead to more conflict and polarization around those issues and make it harder to find, any kind of common ground.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that social change is a constantly evolving thing, and that trying to impose a certain set of values can sometimes backfire,
Totally. It's important to be mindful of the unintended consequences of trying to socially engineer things, and to remember that diversity of viewpoints is actually a strength, not a weakness.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored this conservative vision for America, looking about the potential upsides and the potential downsides. But now I'm kind of left wondering, how realistic is all of this? Could this vision actually be implemented in a country as complex and diverse as the United States?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it would definitely face like a ton of challenges, both political and practical.
Right, right. It would need a ton of support from, both the public and the people in power, and it would almost certainly face like a lot of pushback from folks who hold different values and priorities.
Exactly. And even if it did gain widespread support, there's still the question of, how do you actually translate these broad principles into like concrete policies that can actually be implemented effectively?
Yeah, it's not as simple as just like snapping your fingers and turning America into, a conservative utopia.
Not at all. It would be a long and difficult process with a lot of potential for things to go wrong.
Right, right. Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on today. We've explored this fascinating and thought-provoking document, and we've seen how it lays out a really comprehensive vision for a conservative America, touching on pretty much every aspect of government and society.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting deep dive.
It has. And, while we can't predict the future, it's clear that these ideas are having a real impact on American politics and society as a whole.
Absolutely, and I think it's crucial for anyone who wants to understand, the forces that are shaping our country to grapple with these ideas, whether they agree with them or not.
Right, right. It's about being informed and engaged in the debates of our time. So to wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We've been focusing on this particular vision of America, a vision rooted in conservative principles. But it's so important to remember that there are many other visions out there, many other ways of understanding the challenges we face and the best way to address them.
That's a great point. It's essential to engage with different perspectives, to listen to different voices, and to be open to different solutions.
Exactly. We need to have like a genuine conversation about the future we want to build, a conversation that includes everyone, regardless of their political beliefs or background.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
That's the only way we're going to find, any kind of common ground and build a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
Well said. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep those minds open and happy diving.